All right, so let's start. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another session of the webinar series LLAC Convida. This is an initiative of the Laboratory of Academic Literacy of the University of São Paulo that is coordinated by Professora Marília, who is here with us, Mendes Ferreira, Professora Maria Mendes Ferreira. This initiative, in this initiative, we invite language scholars to talk about language for academic and research purposes in English and Portuguese. And as I said, this webinar will be recorded and made available in LLAC USP YouTube channel. Today, I'm happy to have with us Professor Daria Dayter with the talk Triangulation in Discourse Analysis, Building Bridges Between Methods and Data Types. Daria Dayter is an associate professor in English at Tampere University, Finland. She researched persuasion in social media, and she is a co-founding member of the corpora communicative practice on Reddit and OSSO, online self-service online research networks. She's interested in language of online community, pragmatics, and discourse identity. Professor Dayter has published monographs on the topic Discursive Selves in Microglobulin in 2016, published by the Routledge in 2022. Another monograph naming the language of pickups artists. So thank you again, Daria Dayter, to accept our invitation, and thanks so much for agreeing to talk with us. And now this time it will work. So take it away. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Jose. Second time's the charm. Let's see that everything works. I'll share the slides now. Okay, can you see the slides well?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Good. So I don't actually study literacy practices in English for special purposes. I think there might be an echo. If somebody's microphone is not muted. Okay, now it's fine. Right, so I don't actually focus on literacy or English for special purposes. So my contribution into your research or to your lecture series is perhaps more methodological. I will try to focus on how such methods as corpus approaches, corpus linguistics, in combination with discourse analysis can be used to study social phenomena. And those phenomena can, of course, have something to do also with special English for special purposes and literacy practices. But when you see me going through my studies, perhaps you can sort of try this hat on to what you are working on and see how this method can be applied. So I'm an English linguist, and my interest is primarily in Anglophone discourses. Today I will be talking about the United States political discourse. Recently, or perhaps over the last few years, the tendency has been noticed that communication media design leads to polarization in public. A polarization is a phenomenon, well, I guess a state or a tendency that knows the growth of groups at the extremities of social hierarchy and the shrinking of groups around its middle. It's quite interesting for me as a discourse analyst and applied linguist to study how polarization happens and how it can be prevented. And with this angle in mind, I try to design a study to study this polarization and to study it in a reliable manner. Criticism that is often leveled against discourse analysis is that it's a qualitative research design that very much relies on the interpretative aspects of the researcher's work. And of course, when we're talking about the US political discourses, the criticism that is often heard is that left-wing researchers bring their own agenda to the study and get, well, this sort of results that they expect. So I'm hoping that maybe we can add some validity to qualitative discourse analytic study through the process called triangulation. We can study any kind of social practice by triangulating through different methods, by integrating methods, as we do in corpus-assisted discourse analysis, and combining data sets to enhance the validity and credibility of the findings. That's essentially what we refer to when we say we triangulate the study. Triangulation can come in several flavors. There can be investigator triangulation when several people independently study the same phenomenon. Theoretical triangulation when we use different theoretical lenses to look at the same thing. But also, most importantly, probably the most prominent use of triangulation is methodological and data triangulation. And that's what I will be talking about today. So when we try to use different methods or feed one method into another in a recursive manner to enhance the validity of our findings. And data triangulation is when we use different data sets to access the same social phenomenon, again, to enhance and confirm the validity of findings. Of course, our hope when we start triangulating is that the results will be the same. When different investigators study the same thing, or when we use different methods to study the same thing on different data sets. So that outcome of triangulation is referred to as convergence. So results confirm one another. It's important to remember that it's not 100% bulletproof guarantee of greater validity. Of course, there is always a chance so that results converged by accident. But it does make things better than when you're just using one investigator, one method, or one data set. However, triangulation outcome is not always the happy one, the convergence. We can also get dissonance when the results we get are incompatible with another. It's quite interesting, although perhaps not surprising, that dissonance is rarely reported. So if we try to use different methods and different data sets and got the same result, we're going to write a paper about it. But if they clashed, you will not find this information in the paper, or perhaps the study won't be published at all. This is a bit of a pity because very often, of course, people end up repeating the same study that has been done before but not published because it received negative results. So I think now, especially in the humanities and social sciences, there is a growing trend of reporting negative results as well. And I would like to encourage you to also report dissonant triangulation. And finally, a type of triangulation that hopefully I can demonstrate to you today is complementarity. When we don't get the same result from different types of study, but they fit together, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. So they complement each other. And that can give us deeper understanding of the social phenomenon that we're studying. So I will be talking about triangulating using two different methods, corpus linguistics and discourse analysis. And some use of triangulation, kind of very purist views, would tell you that it's not really triangulation if the study is not done completely independently. And in corpus-assisted discourse analysis, you take corpus linguistic results and you feed them into discourse analytic pipeline, and then you put them back into corpus linguistic one and back into a discourse analytic. So it's a recursive process, and the methods kind of work together and complement each other. So that's the type of two-method approach that I will be talking about today. And there is an excellent paper on how corpus-assisted discourse analysis can be seen as an instance of triangulation by Anna Markki and Charlotte Taylor that I very much encourage you to read if you're interested in the topic, who highlight the practices of using different data sources and two different analysts for coder agreement as a means of triangulation. And that gives us a chance to look at more data, to access non-obvious meanings, gives us different ways of looking at data. And maybe most importantly, for kind of social problems, societal problems that accessed through discourse, it gives us ways of tracing discourse development. When I study certain social phenomenon through discourse, I like to think about discourses as a kind of funhouse mirror. We see several warped images of the same social problem, and we try to make sense of what the object really is. So, you know, left-wing media can be talking about the same event in a slightly different way than right-wing media does, and a grassroots user might have yet another narrative to present about it. But perhaps if we put all of them together, we might kind of get close to what the event or the phenomenon actually is. My interest is primarily in discourse and online discourse. Actually, maybe this is a good point to define what discourse is, because it's such a vague term. So I see discourse as a set of meanings, a set of metaphors, set of representations that in some way together produce a particular version of events. Surrounding the same event, object, or a person, there can be a variety of different discourses, each with a different story to tell about this object of observation and different way of representing it to the world. So we don't have one, like a discourse, or the discourse of COVID, or the discourse of immigration, but we would have several different ones. So as someone who studies online discourse, I also have an interest in communities, especially communities of practice, but also discourse communities. And I also have an interest in persuasion. In the study I will be talking about today, all of those things kind of converge little by little. And you can see the history of where I'm coming from in my earlier work, where I started with the way people represent themselves and build communities on Twitter, in microblogs, back when Twitter was still young and didn't belong to Elon Musk. Or also the work I've done together with Sophia Rudiger on a smaller community that is active online of so-called pickup artists, or the very large, loose, non-overlapping community of Reddit users. And that's the work we do together with Thomas Messerly as a part of our corpora research team. So when we take all of those three together, online discourse, communities, and persuasion, and look at the US political discourse, what emerges as an area of interest are persuasive tools, certain terms which appear again and again in those discourses that have undergone semantic change. And examples are things like woke, wokeness, political correctness. Right-wing parties often like to use such terms to whip up the moral panics about not being able to say what you mean without, for example, being cancelled. Today I will talk about one such term, namely cancel culture. Using keywords as a tool of access to the discourses is a well-established tradition in discourse studies. You might have heard the term discourse keywords. And there is a lot of excellent work on those, shedding light on societal phenomena. For example, Krishnamurthy looked at words like ethnic, radical, and tribal as discourse keywords. Stubbs looked at heritage and care. Mautner analyzed elderly, a very interesting keyword that has certain discursive struggle around it. And there is always work that shows it actually pays to look at an interface of two or more languages from the translation studies perspective, because the same cognate word like humanitarian and humanitario, or multicultural and multicultural, can have different sets of meanings and discourses associated with them. So discourse keyword is a conflation of two methodological concepts: a cultural keyword, an idea that was first introduced by Williams back in the 70s. And a cultural keyword is the shared body of words and meanings in most general sense. For example, in English, it can be the practices and institutions which we group as culture and society of Anglophone users. And we take this more qualitatively defined term and we merge it with a more quantitatively defined one, which is a corpus keyword. That's a word which differs most statistically significantly in frequency in two corpora, one of them corpus in question and the other one a reference corpus. So qualitative and quantitative definition taken together give us this really interesting lens through which we can try to access main narratives about a topic. Some characteristics of discourse keyword that have been described so far are that they're usually polysemous, so they can be construed differently on different occasions of use. If they just have one clear meaning, it's not going to give us access to any kind of discursive struggle. They're categorical, so they designate social or cultural concepts of practice or practices. And most importantly, they're contested. People disagree about how they're construed on different occasions of use. And I remind you of the examples I gave you before, such as woke or political correctness or cancel culture. So different groups of people would disagree and contest the meaning of those. We can find out what discourse keywords are or which discourse keywords exist in our data by using certain quantitative or at least observable characteristics. So discourse keywords tend to be frequent in the discourses under scrutiny, easy to establish, of course. They function as semantic nodes. So once you find something which is a candidate discourse keyword and start digging deeper into its collocations, into its contexts of use, you would see a more in-depth analysis unfolding. They tend to cluster with other discourse keywords. So if you found one, probably others are close by, and they concern controversially debated issues. For my study, to come up with some candidate keywords for the United States political discourse, I quickly used two corpora, an English broadsheet newspapers, 9321, and a slightly more recent collection of the US news from LexisNexis, which I got searching for the word election. So it will be election-themed news media corpus. And I looked at statistically defined keywords in the US election corpus compared to the English broadsheet newspapers. Some of the candidate keywords and multi-word units which came up through this analysis after I have filtered out function words and any words connected to election, because of course those things would be contingent on my search term, and I also filtered out proper names. So some of the candidate keywords were things like cancel culture, fake news, nonpartisan, democracy, or snowflake. And I decided to go with cancel culture because based on my own experience, it seems to have really interesting contexts of use. So here is the phenomenon that we will be digging at. The use of this discourse keyword, cancel culture. Or maybe it's time to ask if it even is a discourse keyword that is used by two different communities as a persuasive device. It has associated strong emotive meanings. It has newsworthiness. And those two communities, so let's say vaguely right-wing and left-wing speakers, use this word very differently. The question that I like to ask my audience in this kind of lectures is whether you think cancel culture has good or bad connotation. And usually people split somewhere down the middle. So I'm not going to kind of do a poll right now because I didn't set up the polling tool, but maybe you can just think for yourself. Do you think cancel culture is a good thing or a bad thing? People tend to split down the middle, slightly depending on particular linguistic culture they come from. So the definition that is given to cancel culture typically is that it's a means to hold a powerful or famous person accountable for legal, ethical, or social transgressions by deplatforming them and expressing public disapproval, mostly through the medium of social networking services. But if we look at Wikipedia, even a means which is supposed to be quite neutral or judgment-free, we see already an interesting reformulation. The cancel culture is a culture in which those who are deemed to have acted or spoken in an unacceptable manner are ostracized, boycotted, or shunned. And the key word here is deemed, right? So we don't know whether they really acted or spoken in an unacceptable manner, but who deemed them to have done so. And this tendency, or this ability of understanding cancel culture as something negative becomes a little bit more visible in the words of the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, where he says, the goal of cancel culture is to make decent Americans live in fear of being fired, expelled, shamed, humiliated, and driven from society as we know it. So very clearly negative connotations. The word to cancel, or the expression cancel culture, has of course been studied from a communicative and linguistic perspective, but nobody took exactly the same approach, so data-based one. Some people looked at instantiations of canceling someone and call out hashtags. For example, the Twitter controversy around J.K. Rowling. Those were the case studies that I cite here. Media and communication studies also looked at cancel culture, and there are very interesting communicative models developed that show how canceling a certain person or event spreads. And there are also computational linguistics looks at cancel culture that produced good predictive algorithms and interesting corpora. And some work looked at what language tends to trigger the canceling. So not the label cancel culture in itself, but what led to being canceled. So everything's slightly different to what I want to do. I used the corpus news on the web, available from Mark Davis's site, and it's a monitor corpus updated daily from 2010. The first thing in any kind of study that we want to do with the help of corpora is usually to simply look at the frequencies of the phenomenon we're interested in. That's what I've done. I searched for the phrase cancel culture. Turned out the very first instances of its use on the news, in news on the web corpus, occur in early 2018. Then there are a couple of peaks in 2020 and 2021. And then it sort of levels out at the frequency quite a bit higher than where it started. Looking at frequencies in corpus linguistics can make it clear that there exists a certain pattern. For instance, we can see, is this a lock word, or has this word been changing as we would expect a discourse word to be changing? Such dynamism as we see on the slide can be explained by different things. It could be that the term we're looking at strongly collocates with one event or individual. And when this event or individual is discussed, that's when collocation surges. Or it could be that there is certain semantic change going on, contested meanings, which would make it a discourse keyword and a semantic node that allows us to access this social topic from our funhouse mirror reflections that I showed you in the beginning. So my guess is that we do see this kind of dynamism in the frequency of cancel culture use exactly because it is a discourse keyword. Something is happening there. So the next step we could take, still using corpus linguistic methodology, is to look at the collocations of our item in question. The collocation, to cite this well-known quote by Firth, is the company that a word keeps and that allows us to say something more about this word. It's a relationship of habitual co-occurrence between words or between frequent uninterrupted strings of word forms, which is what we're using in this case because cancel culture is two orthographic words. And judgment about whether something collocates or not is made also based on frequency statistics. For this study, I used this statistic called MI, mutual information. It's perhaps not the best one, but that's the one that's available in the English corpora interface that I was using. So some examples of how collocates can tell us something about the word and its contexts in the corpus can be seen here. So the word climate in the now corpus to collocate with words like change or action. The word riot collocates with police capital 6th of January, right? It's very clear what is the context of use here. Riot mainly is used to talk about the events of US presidential election. Oh, here are a couple of non-politically colored ones that I chose for you, like salad and linguistics. You can see salad collocates with things like kachumba or niçoise, and linguistics collocates with a few proper names. And this is unfortunately a side effect of the MI collocation metric. It tends to highlight a very low frequency word or very low frequency words that collocate with our node. So we need to keep that in mind and perhaps use some other metric to access the high frequency word, like function word that collocate with our node. So the process we would use here is to start maybe by looking at collocates in those peaks or in the areas where frequency changes, because we want to see what sort of events or what sort of context triggered this kind of change. So here is what we find in 2 peaks and the first chow. Words like deplatforming, correctness, wokeness, knee-jerk, groupthink. They don't immediately give us access to understanding why is cancel culture changing so much or what exactly is happening there. But what I take from this first look is that there are sets of non-overlapping or very little overlapping strong collocates that are associated with cancel culture. So it makes sense to look closer at the collocates. And this is where our triangulation, or using 2 different methods together, kind of comes into play, because we want to switch from the level of corpus to the level of text. Instead of just looking at the stats for particular words, we start looking closer at the context of use. To do this, I have extracted collocates of cancel culture from my corpus in 3 months increments. So in the end, it will be a really large Excel table, which here you can see only a part of. It continues further beyond the screen on the right until 2023. And you can see the number of collocates grows as the frequency grows naturally. This is just a statistical fact. But what we can do with these collocates is we can approach them with our qualitative analyst hat on, or interpretative analysis, and group them semantically into some sorts of themes or topoi that reflect different contexts of use of cancel culture. So topoi that I have come up with based on my list of collocates are as follows. There is a topos of communicative distance. It's somewhat neutral one that marks the uses of words that seem to describe kind of meta-linguistic descriptions of cancel culture. So so-called, concept, dictionary, Macquarie, those have to do with the concept of cancel culture entering a dictionary, but also phrase or synonymous. So it's about cancel culture. And there are a few kind of more marked, more emotionally marked, more semantically marked domains like sexual harassment, irrationality, including words like fear, believer, knee-jerk, groupthink, violence and danger, like slams, radical, mob, flailing, disease, toxic, amok, or antidote. And there is a general association with social media, so like Twitter, viral, and deplatforming. So that's a process that you can use in your potential study. You find your candidate discourse keyword, look at the frequencies and the collocates, and then you start interpreting the collocates with some kind of inductive grouping in mind. Now we go back from the level of text to the level of corpus, and from the discursive qualitative method to the more bird's eye one. What I've done here is I have taken my whole period of interest from 2018 until late 2023. I broke it down by 3 months increment, which is how I extracted the collocates. And I marked with a colored square each instance where the collocates from a particular theme or particular topos appeared. So it's kind of a binary marking. There is no frequency judgment here. Just if it's blue, it means at least one collocate from this particular topos has appeared in that time period. So at a first glance, perhaps it's not very telling. Now let's see, let's have a look more closely what's going on here. You can see in the beginning of this period, 2018 to 2019, we have the topos of sexual harassment, and then it disappears. We also have a topos of individuals, which kind of doesn't occur very often in this beginning period. It appears much more prominently later. So it seems like maybe there was one individual talked about when cancel culture just started coming into use as a phrase, and also the topos of social networks. So generally, I would say this beginning period, 18 to 19, cancel culture is associated most of all with the Me Too movement. And that's how it sort of jumps to public awareness and to the news discourses. Those are discussions about what's happening on Twitter, on social media in regard to sexual harassment. You will notice that I haven't circled the first topos of communicative distance, and for now we're leaving it alone, so I'll get back to that later. That's our first period. Now in the middle, that's where those peaks were. We have a very strong topos of violence and danger and irrationality. And then moving further down the timeline, somewhat overlapping with this middle peak area, the topos of violence danger stays there, topos of irrationality stays there, but we also get something that I called complaining, whining. I split it out from irrationality, and it only includes 2 words, complaining and whining, and their word forms. You can see that they're completely confined to the tail end of our corpus. So something started happening in the end of our timeline from 21 to 23 that caused people to talk about cancel culture in the context of complaining and whining. And the individuals are often mentioned there as well. So let's map this to our frequency plot. In the beginning, it's the social media and gender-related issues. So we label the practice of holding the powerful accountable as cancel culture. And it's only just starting to come into awareness of the public on the news. Then there's 2 big peaks. That's irrationality and violence topos. Cancel culture is irrational mobbing. That's the main discourse on the news. And then as it levels out, it's this complaining, whinging, irrationality. So maybe we're not so afraid of it anymore. It's not violence and danger, but it's about people being offended and shocked too easily. And you can see this better if I color our beautiful map here. So the first period is marked in green. That's a social media and sexual harassment topoi. And you can see that they only occur in the beginning. And there are a couple of mentions of social media in the very last months. And violence, irrationality, disease, those are topoi which are clustered most strongly in the middle where the peaks are, but they also continue in an interrupted manner in the end. Okay, it's probably not surprising that mentions of individuals are kind of spread out because there will always be people associated with a certain phenomenon. So it's a bit of a rubbish bin category that's not very useful. But what I found very interesting here is this communicative distancing topos. I would have expected it to occur only in the beginning, where people are introducing the labeling of cancel culture. But it seems to be spread out. I found it very odd, intuitively not clear to me. So I decided to look a bit closer at what's in that topos. So generally, this topos includes words like concept, phrase, dictionary, thing, query. But when I started looking through concordances for each of the 3 months increments, I found out that concept, phrase, dictionary, thing, they're all clustered in the beginning, just as I expected. But what accounts for this topos spread all over the timeline is this one word, so-called, which I added into the category communicative distancing. So now we can again go from the level of corpus to the level of text and do concordance analysis, so search for all the instances of so-called, extract a random sample of lines associated with so-called. I think there is some kind of microphone problem again. Okay. And is it echo? Okay, now it's gone. And have a look at the context in which so-called is used. So now we're looking at second order collocates, because so-called is a collocate of cancel culture, and now we're looking at what occurs next to so-called. We can again do some sort of semantic grouping of them. So what I did, I extracted 100 concordance lines of so-called collocating with cancel culture, or fewer than 100 if there were not 100, if there were fewer, for each of the 3 months periods, and coded them thematically. Although this was not 100% descriptive of all the themes I found in there, I could see that 2 broad categories emerged. And this was confirmed by extracting collocations for so-called, which I coded with those 2 categories in mind. And I will again show you a big kind of color map. I have blurred the actual themes here because they are not important. What's important are those 2 large categories that I will show you in a minute. What I want you to see here is that we see a very similar patterning to what we observed before. There is green in the beginning when it was just being introduced, then predominantly red for the large middle part, and then there is a mix of red and green in the tail end of cancel culture use. And what are those 2 categories, this green and red? So this refers in so-called being used in 2 distinct ways. First of all, it can be used to point out that a concept is incorrectly or falsely termed. So you're affiliating yourself with the original cancel culture, which was good, and you're disaffiliating with the acquired meaning of the term, which is kind of misunderstanding. So that's what I colored green in the previous area. Here is an example for you. The moral panic over so-called cancel culture is a striking example of this. What it really boils down to is an attempt by millennials and Zoomers to assert their progressive social values and reject the bigotries found among some older Britons. So it's a good thing that you want to assert your progressive social values and reject bigotries. And this is broadly positive use of so-called plus cancel culture. But there is another one, that's the one that I quoted in red in the previous table, where the speaker distances themselves from the term and expresses condescension towards those complaining, whinging, whining, cancel culture snowflakes. So Cuomo continued, one manifestation of the extremism is so-called cancel culture. Cancel culture says, if you don't agree with me and my point of view, you should be canceled. So that's clearly a bad connotation of cancel culture, because of course, not everyone who disagrees with your point of view deserves to be deplatformed. And after this kind of coding in 2 ways has been finished, and I split our whole topos of communicative distancing according to this information, what we find is this. In the beginning, mostly green, when cancel culture is new term, and there is this meta-linguistic discussion. In the middle, there's condescension, derisive attitudes towards snowflake, which broadly patterns together with violence, danger, moral panics about cancel culture. And in the end, we have this mix of green and red discursive struggle where both uses appear. So that is very similar to what we found for the rest of the topoi. An interesting way in which we can jump back from text to corpus is to have a look at the other contexts, at the other words which appear in the same context of use. So of course, defining the object of study will influence our findings. we decided that we'll look at cancel culture, so we will find certain things associated with them. One step that we can take to overcome this bias, or at least to put a question mark in front of our findings, is to look at corpus synonyms, so at words that appear in similar context to cancel culture. And the word which emerged as this kind of corpus synonym when I look at a really large corpus of internet language NTEN 1021 is deplatforming. So if we plot the frequency of deplatforming next to cancel culture, some interesting bits can be spotted. So for instance, deplatforming came into use before cancel culture, slightly earlier. Then they moved in parallel. Deplatforming is less frequent than cancel culture, but it still seems to match the general trend. So when cancel culture goes up, deplatforming goes up. But one place where they don't move in parallel is this here. And that would tell me at a glance that this particular peak, the one that is circled in red right now, it's a different use of the word cancel culture. It's not the same sense as deplatforming. It's not used synonymously with it. And indeed, this particular peak is due to Donald Trump's speech at Mount Rushmore, where he first introduced this different meaning of cancel culture associated with moral panics, danger, irrationality. So not synonymously to deplatforming, but rather synonymously maybe to witch hunt and burning at the stake. And we can see that this meaning is different by the fact that it doesn't parallel the frequency of deplatforming, the corpus synonym. If we compare the collocates side by side, further differences emerge. For example, cancel culture tends to collocate with itself and words like woke, silencing, censorship. So that's your typical right-wing Trump-inspired collocates. And deplatforming is maybe less emotionally colored, and it has some descriptive terms associated with right-wing practices like Parler, which was a social media app used, for instance, for coordinating capital attacks. An interesting distinction that I spotted in this set of collocates for cancel culture deplatforming is that cancel culture collocates with far left and deplatforming collocates with far right. You don't find those two terms in the other set. Make of this what you will. I haven't done concordance analysis for that, but this is another way in which a discourse keyword serves as a semantic node, right? This place where you can start digging deeper. That would be another kind of arm of the study for you to have a look where cancel culture collocates with far left. Is it something that is ascribed to far left? And deplatforming something that is ascribed to far right, or are far right and far left the objects for the transitive verbs there? So by enabling this kind of dialogue between corpus and text, this meaning of triangulation where we use two different methods to complement each other, we can identify points of salience in our corpus. We can use corpus linguistic method to funnel down millions and millions of words of data to find a small enough sample that we can study qualitatively. And then we recontextualize it using qualitative close reading. One more way in which we can bring different data set and different method into the study is to have a look at reception and attitudes. And we have a really good tool here. It's a Pew Research Center in 2020, exactly when the first peak occurred, asked Americans to say in their own words how they understand canceling someone. Please note the phrasing here, not cancel culture, but canceling someone, transitive verb, that's going to be important. You can see that interestingly, the first most prominent use is actions taken to hold others accountable. So that's a positive one, despite the moral panics that already starts in 2020 about cancel culture. So further, of course, we have censorship and mean-spirited actions, but the first one is positive. So that made me wonder, is the transitive use of the verb to cancel someone somehow different from cancel culture, which in 2020 already had very strong collocations with violence, danger, rationality? And indeed, this turned out to be the case. So to cancel someone in 2020 has a lot of positive uses. So here are some examples for you. Maybe now that Brahma is talking the nonsense that affects all of us, you all can finally cancel him. He's shown this recklessness to those who have eyes before. So of course, canceling someone who is talking nonsense and has shown recklessness is a positive use. Or this came after Rowling was cancelled by hundreds of Harry Potter fans and actors, including Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint. She was cancelled following her derogatory, offensive comments on trans people. So again, of course, it's good to cancel somebody or deplatform somebody who is spouting derogatory, offensive comments on trans people. So those are clearly positive uses. And I did this very kind of quick and dirty breakdown of canceling someone in 2020 to positive and negative uses, and the frequencies seem very similar. So about 60% negative and 40% positive, which is very different from what we see for cancel culture, which means that to cancel someone, transitive verb can be just and fair, as opposed to the nominal use of cancel culture. Patterns of transitivity can make a difference when we talk about word forms for discourse keywords. All right, so we talked about how we can triangulate the data from discourse analysis and give it more validity by using corpus linguistics approaches. Another way of giving it more validity is to do data source coordination, so data triangulation. And to show how this can be done, I have a slightly different example for you that comes from my work on pickup artists. So pickup artists is a community of men who practice what they call themselves speed seduction. So trying to get women's phone numbers, kiss them, or get them into bed as fast as possible. And they believe that this can be done very efficiently, following certain rules, scripts, and scenarios. And this community is active online or offline, and they put a lot of stock into certain verbal routines and verbal scripts, which is very interesting for us as linguists. It's a long-running research project that I collaborate on with Sofia Rudiger. An example of this kind of verbal routine is something that you can see on the slide below here. You'd be really beautiful if your nose was smaller. This is something that is called a neg, which is given a backhanded compliment, including a condescending line that puts down the woman. And it is supposed to make a woman more interested in continuing a conversation with you because she will try to prove her worth. So somewhat manipulative tactic, as we'll show you later. Studying pickup artists is not just interesting for us as linguists from the descriptive linguistic point of view, but it's actually societally a very important phenomenon because they are part of this conglomerate of broadly anti-feminist male communities called the manosphere, of which pickup artists is probably the most benign and largest part, but there exists pipeline towards radicalization and extremism through other communities, more extreme, violent ones like men's rights activists, men going their own way, and finally incels, which is a men's rights community that's notorious for many, well, yeah, a good few violent attacks by now. And since we know that people spend a lot of time online, especially young people, they often have harmful experiences online. It's quite important for us to study this community, especially what happens when a new person enters a community, what sort of discursive dynamics exist there, and how people are being recruited. In this long-standing project, we studied a lot of different genres that exist in pickup artist study ecology, all sorts of things, boot camps, instructional texts, seduction lectures. And the example I will show today for the data triangulation is so-called in-field. So an in-field, by the way, we collected those from YouTube, from the channels posted on seduction industry YouTube channels. And the in-field is a type of interaction that involves both an interaction of an experienced pickup artist who sees himself as a teacher, so-called pickup artist guru, with a woman. That's the interaction we see on video. But then there is also a lecturing part that is produced by this guru who lectures towards his audience. So you can see this anonymized screenshot here. In the background, there is a hidden camera video of the pickup artist talking to the woman. That's the first level of interaction. But then in the corner, there is this little cut in of the guru giving his commentary of what's happening. And that's the second level of interaction of pickup artists talking to other pickup artists. We used 3 sources of data here to study one speech event. So the speech event is a video of about 23 minutes that includes 6 minutes of the actual pickup artist woman interaction. And the rest of it is this lecture by the guru. And it includes the transcript of pickup artist woman interaction, which is about 800 words. Then we also collected the comments on this YouTube video. And finally, we used the transcript of this lecturing part, which is significantly longer. Let me show you some examples. So here is the very beginning of this interaction. And we have anonymized women's speech because we want to preserve their anonymity. Of course, they didn't provide the permission to be filmed or to be used in the study. And we are mostly interested in what pickup artists do. So here, pickup artist stops a woman walking in the mall by shouting to her, pink dress, purple, F this, hey, don't go high. Then he asks question repeatedly. How much time do I have to impress you before your boyfriend comes? Then he continues trying to hug her, says, hug me, what's your name? The woman tries to say, no, I need to go. So the pre-closing. And he continues with a non sequitur question, are you a sweet or salty person? The first approach that we took to studying this kind of transcript is to see what happens in terms of relative power. And existing work on relative power in talk has given us some conversational indicators of relative power, something that we can actually count. That's a speaking ratio, who speaks more and who speaks longer. Frequency of second person pronouns, which serves as a proxy for direct style. If I say you all the time, I'm addressing you directly. And also frequency of imperatives, so very kind of bossy orders, and frequency of questions. When we look at these quantitative indicators, it's very clear that the left column, what pickup artists do, is always higher. So pickup artists talk more than the women. 79 versus 21% of all words are spoken by pickup artists. They use second person pronouns a lot more than women, so 45 versus 8. They ask a lot more questions, 83% versus 17, and they use a lot more imperatives, 81 versus 19. That's kind of one aspect of the data that we looked at. Of course, I'm glossing over a lot of details here, but just looking at the transcript of the pickup artist talking to the woman, pickup artist shows a lot more indicators of relative power. Here, if we look at this transcript again, something that we notice is how many questions the pickup artist asks. Just in this first 13 lines, there are 4 questions. There is 7 questions within the first 18 lines alone. So pickup artists exercise their power not just verbally, but also physically, when he puts an arm around the woman. And they continue to try to manipulate the woman into continuing the engagement by references to missed opportunities. I'll see you in one life or another. I have a flight to New Zealand in the morning. I have to leave right now. So those are different ways in which they try to create engagement. They're not really interested in the quality of engagement. They just want the woman to keep talking. For example, this non sequitur question like, are you a sweet or salty person? Or the references to missed opportunities. Right, so that's what we find looking at one type of data, that they show indicators of relative power, and they're trying to manipulate the woman into engagement no matter what. Now let's have a look at the second data type, and that's the meta commentary by the pickup artist guru. Here is an example for you. In episode 20, it's going to be a clip where basically I just open a girl. She didn't open. Maybe she didn't hear me, so I just said F this. and I just committed, and then boo, off the top, I was feeling some sexual energy, and then I just walked with. I know I had a short window, so I walked with, and I see how far I can push it. And yeah, I get a makeout number close. So number close is getting her phone number. The target audience for his commentary are the male viewers of the video, some kind of imagined audience of students. So when he says she hasn't heard, he reinterprets it in his favor as saying maybe she didn't hear him, that's why she didn't stop. Even though the pickup artist ultimately failed with his advances, of course, his aim is seduction, he presents the interaction as success. So he got a makeout number close. He managed to put his arms around her in a hug, and he got some sort of phone number. We don't really know whether it was a real one. So he does this by invoking a training frame in which he cannot fail. He says he doesn't care what the outcome is, he just committed to see how far he can push it. If his only aim in this interaction was to see how far he can push it, of course, he's always succeeding, even though when held against the standards of the pickup artist paradigm, where seduction is the ultimate aim, he failed. And he solves this kind of mismatch between his success framing and the woman's reluctance to engage, which we can see very clearly in the video, by introducing a distinction between verbal behavior and her body language. So she might be saying no, but her body language says yes. Here is a pretty extreme example that I can show you. Okay, now look at this. She's saying no, but look at her body language. Look at her arms around me. She's saying no, but deep down inside, she's not going anywhere. So that's the reason why I want to point out, it's like if a girl tells you no, notice. And I'm not saying notice and like everything all at once. This is going to take time, but start being aware of where her body positioning is at, her arms, her temperature. If it's a little warmer in the lower half, in her vaginal area, you want to be seeing if that heat is radiating and she might be ready to go, right? So according to him, men should dismiss verbal rejection and instead focus on the body language of the woman to like the absurd degree. Instead of referring to specific observable instances of body language, he instructs the audience to start being aware of the woman's body and arms. So it's very vague. He doesn't say what position of body and arms says yes. He just says be aware of the body and arms. Instruction also implies that there is an arms position that conveys a genuine no, and another position that conveys a covert yes. However, these are not described in the advice, and that advice remains quite non-committal. Probably he does that to ensure plausible deniability. A similar issue exists in line 9 that we have here, because there is no baseline for warmer and no instruction on how exactly one should be seeing the radiating heat. Of course, it's impossible. So the pickup artist appeals to idiosyncratic and underdetermined communicative medium of body language to make a very high stakes decision that is actually, well, the price of false positive is going to be sexual assault. So what we see is that any action can be interpreted as a sign of showing interest in the pickup artist. There is nothing the woman can say or do that cannot be interpreted as a no. And this is very much in line with the so-called anti-rape discourses, so verbal versus body language, and discourses of last-minute resistance. Kind of contrasting the idea of date rape, there is this idea of date fraud, that woman has been given positive signals with her body language the whole time, and then in the end she says no, so she's committing date fraud. Very, very interesting way in which the pickup artist commentary reflects this widely existing discourse of anti-rape. So she says yes, but her body, she says no, but her body says yes. Finally, we looked at the YouTube comments on this video, and we classified them as having positive evaluation, negative evaluation, or other. So no evaluation or something that we couldn't decide on. and also as comments endorsing pickup artistry and criticizing pickup artistry. So what we see here is that the majority of the comments endorses pickup artistry. Even the ones that negatively evaluate what's happening on the screen still endorse the very paradigm. So they're still on board with anti-rape discourses, discourse of last-minute resistance, the idea that you can verbally manipulate the woman into having sex with you. They just negatively evaluate what the pickup artist is doing at this moment. And there are a lot fewer comments that both criticize pickup artistry and also negatively evaluate what's happening on the screen. So while the majority of comments is negatively evaluative, they still mostly endorse the idea of what pickup artists do. So it's 84 negatively evaluative ones versus 32 positively evaluative ones. And I'll show you some examples here. So for instance, this one, all these fools saying you sound desperate and shit are just mad they don't have game like that. It's so important to stay persistent. So that's a positively evaluative comment that endorses pickup artistry. I would say good job if she wasn't drunk out of her mind. Do you have any day game videos? So vaguely positive evaluation, endorsing pickup artistry. I felt like I was being a little too thirsty over this woman. She lied to you twice. First, she said she didn't have a man, and then before the video ends, she said she has a man. She wasn't that interested despite making out with you, right? So endorses pickup artistry and negative. All I saw was a forced connection. You look and sound like a creep. This isn't game. This is taking advantage. Everything you did in this video is illegal. I'm not a hater. I came on this page to learn, and all I saw was a creep. So strongly negative comment, which still endorses pickup artistry. He came to learn about pickup artists, but this particular one is apparently a creep. So what do we get from this 3 different data sources triangulating the same phenomenon? It's very interesting that we managed to get all of them from the social media, because we get both our evaluation as investigators. We get the emic evaluation by the speaker, which is what the pickup artist says in his lecture. And we get the second order emic evaluation by the community from the comments. And we notice that those two may differ. What the pickup artist guru thinks and what community thinks is not the same. So our takeaway is that actually this kind of infield gets an ambivalent reception. They don't necessarily positively endorse all the time what he's doing. And pickup artists' own assessment is being continuously questioned. People don't always agree that what he says is an indicator of interest, And overall, this study gave us the following findings. Just maybe you were interested to know. I didn't give you the whole analysis, of course. We found out that pickup artists exercise conversational power, that they recognize the woman's attempts to disengage, but willfully ignore them under the pretext of nonverbal cues, body temperature, or arm position. The audience is familiar with this narrative of date fraud or body versus language, but sometimes they do challenge it. So they say that pickup artists maybe misunderstands the body signals. However, this frame of pursuing with utmost persistence is acceptable and is endorsed. It's okay to, run after the woman, ignore her attempts to disengage, or hug her without her permission, because that is game. And it's demonstrably impossible for the woman to provide responses verbally or with gesture that a pickup artist would deem convincing enough to abandon this utmost persistent strategy. All right, so my last slide for you is, why would we want to do this kind of triangulation? Data triangulation and method triangulation. We could see how the findings could be recontextualized. Remember going from corpus to text and back, where I found different uses of cancel culture and the difference in using to cancel and cancel culture. We can get access to new information, like in the pickup artist example. We would have never known that pickup artist own assessment is being questioned and the reception is ambivalent. And we have also learned that it's very important to do perception research, like looking at the study by Pew Research, which had a lot of positive uses of canceling someone in the year when the violence, danger, irrationality topoi have surged. I think there are some other prospective methods that can be used in the future for this kind of studies that maybe are not being very widely applied yet. For instance, speculative research, just trying to, well, guess or predict what will happen in the future in a particular contextual situation, or experimental pragmatics research, where we set up an experimental design to see the uses of language, the instances of language in use. And I hope that this kind of approaches, speculative research and experimental pragmatics, will be used more often by you maybe in your future studies, because it gives us a level of self-awareness in investigating the ideological sides of various debates. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you want to get the bibliography, you can find it under the QR code in the corner there. Thank you. And that's it. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Daria. Very interesting and so many, a very useful approach.
It's too much, as I hear. A lot
Yeah.